Hello and welcome to episode 349 of the Crate and Crowbar PC Gaming Podcast, being recorded on the 19th of November 2020. I'm Marsh Davis, and this evening I'm joined by Tom Senior
Hello.
and Graham Smith.
Hello.
What's the news this week?
What is the news, Marsh? You tell us.
I thought you were going to introduce a question.
Oh, yes, I was actually. You're quite right. I was wondering, does anyone on this podcast care about the next generation of consoles that has just been released this week?
No.
That's a fantastic noise. That noise was the sound of total ambivalence.
I'm not necessarily like a console early adopter, but I mean, I'm usually kind of more excited by it than I am this generation, and I feel like a lot of our peers on the Twitters are very excited. I just haven't got the bug at all this year. I don't know what that means about me, or whether it's about the industry. Probably about me, isn't it?
I don't think that's true, Marsh. I don't think it's about you. I think it's a lack of launch titles. I think there's a lack of kind of so, for example, the PlayStation 5 has sort of bandied around a lot of marketing about the audio of the console. But when I see footage from the PS5 and indeed from the next Xbox, like, it looks the same as the stuff that runs my PS4 Pro or my PC. I just don't see the leap that would require me to pay £500 to access this slight level of graphical upgrade. And the games just aren't there yet, as I said before.
Well, I don't know if it's specifically a lack of games on the consoles so much as just a time of plenty on the system that I predominantly play on. I have so much I can play on my PC. I don't need anything else, really.
Yeah, that's how I sort of feel as well. I think I have a little bit of fear of missing out when I see people playing Spider-Man Miles Morales on the PS5, but I also have FOMO about Assassin's Creed Valhalla on the PC and Watch Dogs Legion on the PC and about 10 other games that have come out over the past month that I just haven't had time for yet. And so, yeah, there's nothing spectacular on the consoles to make me want to dive in.
Also, my backlog is just so enormous. Like, I still want to get properly stuck into Divinity Original Sin 2, which I've played like 20 hours of and didn't get off the first island. So there's a whole lifetime of game there waiting for me. I just feel like we're sort of... This is a very good problem to have in the sense that there are so many good games on our platform that we just don't need to upgrade or go to the next generation until the very moment that we want to, which feels like a shift to me. That feels different to the last generation.
To their credit, I think the console makers have realized this. Like, I think they have realized that there has been a sea change in the way games are produced, the quantity of games available, and in the kind of leaps you're going to get from hardware upgrades. And so Microsoft especially, their strategy is clearly that they're going to release new iterations of that Xbox every 2 years or so.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a much more gradual upgrade path from here on out. And obviously they're trying to get people to sign up to a subscription service with Xbox Game Pass. But and Sony aren't quite as far as advanced on that line. But between the PS4 and the PS Pro and now the PlayStation 5, it sort of feels like there's going to be a new PlayStation sooner rather than later. Like, it's not going to be another 10-year long console generation, is it?
No.
So I do feel like, the problem that we're identifying right now, the reason why we don't want a new console, the console manufacturers have realized that as well, and so have adapted their business model to suit in some way.
I think Microsoft's particularly on point this generation by actually sort of trying to create the Netflix of games, which is what they've been trying to do for years, and what a lot of the platform makers have been trying to do with like streaming services, which have never quite worked because the bandwidth, especially in our country, is not quite good enough to actually realize that dream. But the idea that you could sort of sign up to Xbox Microsoft Game Pass and just get access to all the blockbuster games, it's super, super good. I think you've taken advantage of that recently, much actually.
Yeah, just to get Assassin's Creed and Watch Dogs. But I may need to revise how good value that is, because I feel like I've played a fucking ton of Assassin's Creed now, and there's so much more of it that by the time I finish that game, I may well have paid more for it on monthly subscriptions than I would have by buying it outright. I think I will get bored of it before that point and still save money on the deal, but yeah.
I think it's worth noting as well that, like, hardware wise, the Xbox, I'm going to get the name wrong, the Xbox Series X is actually good. Like, it's a good console, and for the price, what you're getting is a much more powerful PC than you would be able to get for that amount of money if you were actually buying a PC.
Yeah.
It would cost you probably twice as much. Like, I think the Xbox Series X is like 500 quid or something like that. The graphics card alone that's in it would cost you 300. And so, like, if I was in a position where, this is assuming I'm not a PC games journalist, if I was in a position where my PC was out of date and I was looking to upgrade, I'd probably be looking at 500 quid to upgrade my PC or more to buy a whole new PC. At which point, looking at the Xbox Series X, I probably would be tempted in that situation.
Yeah, the PC sort of ecosystem is an absolute mess at the moment. Like the shortage of new graphics cards and how expensive they are, like so expensive, given like the shortage and the level of demand, means that it's just like at the moment in particular, I can't afford to upgrade my PC, and I'm a professional sort of. I cover the PC professionally, and if I even could get hold of the latest GTX, I wouldn't be able to pay for it. So I think that's just something's sort of like squashed in the market that's actually made it much worse for PC gamers in the last year. Presumably like COVID, but also production issues, etc. So yeah, console looking pretty good right now.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's always the fact that I need my PC to do other things on creative work that requires quite a beefy graphics card, etc. So I don't think I'm ever going to be in that position where I just have a PC for emails or something and then have a console for games. I'm always going to have a PC that's capable of gaming because I need a PC that's capable of building games on it.
Sure.
There was some other news just today that IO Interactive, the makers of Hitman, have picked up the Bond license. It seems they're making Project Bond.
Project 007, I think is what it's called at this point.
It's the origin of Bond. It's Bond's, how Bond became Bond. Is how he gains his 00 status.
He murders a man in a bathroom. We already saw that.
Quite a short Hitman level as they go.
Yeah, he makes an incredibly inappropriate approach to a woman in her own shower on a boat, which is actually something that happens several times in various Bond films. Yeah, I think this is, everyone has said on Twitter and stuff, they're completely right. This is an absolutely brilliant marriage of license and developer, given that the whole vibe of Hitman is already James Bond, just without a massive misogynist as the character. So it's going to be interesting to see how they translate Bond into that kind of mold.
I mean, 47 isn't a misogynist, but only in as far as he despises all human beings.
He has no feelings for anything. Yeah, he's an actual sociopath. But yeah, Bond's got all of these kind of tropes and things that you kind of, I think developers will want to nod to, and a lot of those are out of date, and I'm kind of interested to see how they navigate that, I think.
I'm curious how much like Hitman it's going to be, because obviously Hitman already has exotic locations all over the world. It's a globe-trotting story. It's got social stealth stuff and assassination and combat. But IO have made other games other than just Hitman, and so I wonder if are they just going to do something very similar to Hitman with Bond at its core, or are they going to try and capture a larger audience, because that's the thing with Hitman, is that it's a popular game, it's a successful game, but it's not a super successful game. Like it
Mm.
wasn't successful enough for Square Enix when they were publishing it, and whereas Bond is obviously one of the biggest, IP licenses in the world. And so, like, if you're IO, are you really thinking, oh, we're just going to do James Bond, but do it like Hitman and make it this kind of like niche thing that's going to sell a couple million copies? Or do you start to get tempted and think, no, actually, we want to do big like action set pieces and QTEs and these things that will make it more accessible to a broader audience that have an interest in Bond, but are going to get
Yeah.
confused by the more complex systems and controls of a Hitman game.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's my fear for it, is that because, I mean, before IO made the last two incredibly good Hitman games, they'd also made a whole bunch of fairly bunk Hitman games, right? Which were seduced by the idea of turning Hitman into one of these cinematic, story-driven franchises. That was not playing to their strengths. And I worry with a license which is itself obviously narratively led, they may have their hands forced, essentially, to make something more cinematic.
Maybe they're going to
That's
make it like Kane and Lynch, and it's all going to be shaky cam and
a man's arse pixelated. Yeah, but I think like you're both completely correct. Like they're going to be under huge like studio pressure, and that it's a huge license where the stakeholders will want to control how Bond is shown, how Bond comes across. So that's going to limit their creativity, and that potentially means it won't be such a sandbox as Hitman has been. But we'll see. That's just pure supposition. But we'll see.
What you been playing, Graham?
I've been playing the Pathless, which is a name I struggle to say and pronounce correctly. It's the new game from the developers of Abzu. Did either of you play that?
Yeah,
I love
it's
that.
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, so Abzu is this really gorgeous underwater, how would you describe it? Kind of like action adventure, kind of in the mold of Journey. In fact, I think the developers might have some previous participation in Journey. In fact, I think they spun off from that company.
Oh, cool.
And the Pathless shares some of the same DNA. It's a third-person game set in a big world on land this time. Lots of grass and beautiful trees and that sort of stuff. And you've come here as this kind of you can't speak. You're like a warrior coming to this strange land. The old gods have been captured and turned evil, and you are coming here to bring light, to restore light back to the island. And off in the distance, there's this kind of upside down fiery mountain that you'll be working towards across the course of the game. So it feels quite Journey like.
Yeah, it's very Journey.
In terms of it has the kind of like quiet poise, which is probably not the best way I could describe it, but like there's something like a Journey is obviously a very quiet game, very ponderous with these large, strange architectural features that you're not quite sure how it got there, who made this, or what it was for, and then part of the game is like poking around that to try and work it out. The Pathless is like a much less elegant version of that, in that it has these enormous towers and strange mountain ranges and strange statues, and like there are like fallen soldiers and skeletons everywhere, of like sort of suggesting battles have been happening between followers of different gods and that sort of stuff. But then it will do things like have floating orbs where you can go like above the skeletons, where you can go read a little bit of leaden text telling you the backstory, like worse than audio diaries. It's just a bit of text that comes up on screen. It feels like they wanted to make a game like Journey and sort of chickened out or found that it wasn't working and pivoted partway through. And so like when I was initially playing it, I was thinking, oh, this is a less elegant Journey. This feels clumsy in a bunch of different ways. But then it's got a bunch of other things going for it, and so I found myself. I've played a few hours of it now, and I've been having a growing sense of fun over the course of that time. So like, mainly because of the movement mechanic, you've got a bow, um, which is always nice, and the world is filled with these winking orbs that float around, and as you shoot them with your arrows, they give you a boost of speed as you're running around. And so the game becomes about running around this. It's this kind of semi-open world, and it's got very large open areas, but they're gated off from each other. And as you're running around, you're firing arrows at these orbs to chain together boosts of speed so that you can like leap across larger chasms or just move swiftly across the landscape. And that immediately feels fun. Like there's auto targeting on, so you just have to hold down left trigger to sprint and then keep pressing the right trigger to target and release arrows. And that's really nice. And then like each area has one of the gods roving around as like a big fiery cursed angry monster, who moves around the landscape sort of semi-randomly, so you can encounter him and have like a short little stealth section if you get sucked into his orbit, basically, as he's moving around the arena. But really what you want to be doing is finding these little puzzle boxes in the space, which are very video gamey, much more video gamey than anything I remember there being in Abzu. Like Abzu, I remember having sort of abstract, mysterious environmental puzzles, whereas this, it's pressure plates and putting heavy objects on pressure plates in order to open doors, so you can fire an arrow through some fire, get it to go through a hoop in order to open another door and get another heavy weight that you can put on another pressure plate, and so forth. Very simple video gamey stuff, but quite satisfying. And completing those puzzles gets you tokens, which you can then use to basically charge up 3 towers in each area, which then trap the boss that's been moving around and allow you to go into like a boss battle. Now, the boss battles are pretty decent, mostly because you can't die in them. So there's no threat in the game at any point. Like I've not died at all. You seem to be able to take infinite amounts of damage, and you just kind of get knocked over and then get up again a few seconds later. I don't even think there's a health bar or anything like that I've seen. And so like it's sort of like, I would describe it as inelegant in terms of its design, and deeply unoriginal, I feel like, in the solutions it's come to, and like the raw basic content of it. But it's just really pleasant. Like I'm just having a nice time. Like in terms of the experience of playing it, I like solving puzzles by moving blocks around and putting things in pressure plate. It's never difficult, but it's dead nice. And I should say, like, you're doing this with the help of an eagle, who is like your little buddy. He's technically a god who in the sort of tutorial area seems to die and reincarnate. He's a giant eagle, but he reincarnates as a regular sized eagle. And it's him that you're whistling in order to tell him to pick up weights and move them around. And when you get too close to like one of the baddie gods, he gets frightened and kind of cursed with this sort of like fiery covering over his body that stops him from being able to fly and help you. There's like a glide mechanic that he can kind of carry you, and you can hover along a little bit. And in order to restore his strength after those sections, you got to give him a little pet. So they've actually like managed to make petting the animal 2020's biggest new game feature into like an actually important part of the gameplay in some way.
I did, as you were talking, I looked up some images of the game, and I saw a little video of that petting animation, and it looks really lush. I want to touch an eagle like that.
It's adorable.
Yes, it's kind of like gently kind of caress its wingtips with the tips of your fingers.
It's great.
It's very tactile.
You rub his tummy, and he sort of lifts his head up and wiggles a bit. And as you move your hand over to his wings, he kind of stretches out his wings. It's really beautifully animated. They've gone through the world, and they've obviously marked points of interest in the world, so that if you stand close to them, that's where your eagle will land. So he really likes corpses. So if you're standing near a skeleton or anything like that, he will just like fly over and just like sit on the corpse's head on the ground.
Hooray for skeleton.
I'm getting quite strong Shadow of the Colossus vibes from it. Is that?
Yeah, I mean that's the other touch point other than Journey. I mean it's sort of like a Journey if there were big monsters roving around, and as soon as you do that, it's like, well, those feel like colossi. There's nothing as, again though, like Shadow of the Colossus is a very quiet game. It's like relying on environmental storytelling. It has such a sense of awe when you come across those colossi, and a melancholy or just outright sadness when you fucking brutally murder them. There's none of that really in the Pathless. It doesn't land emotionally at any point, I don't think. It really does feel like a game where, like, I climbed a mountain. I climbed this big snowy mountain. I didn't really know if there was going to be anything up there, but there was a big snowy mountain, and I like being up at the top of high things in video games, so I'm always going to try and get up. So I climbed my way up the top. There was a fort. Yeah, it's cool. It's really cool that there was a fort up there. It was a nice reward. And then the fort was filled with like a lot of skeletons wearing different colored armor, suggesting that there had been some kind of battle. Like, they've gone to a lot of trouble in placing this detail within the world, but you're not encouraged to interact with it or explore it in any meaningful way. And like any chance of having that sort of thoughtful relationship with the environment goes away as soon as you cover it with 4 glowing orbs, each one of which gives you the thoughts of that soldier going, oh no, my god's angry at me and he's going to kill me. I'm dead sad about that. Which is like suddenly like what was this kind of epic like journey of self-exploration, just self-directed exploration, I should say, it just becomes okay, it's video game shit, isn't it?
It's just video game shit, isn't it?
Put that on the box.
Well, like I don't want to be too down on it, because I should, like, that's what I'm saying, because I quite like the video game shit. And there is a thing where, so like, I've kind of forgotten the puzzles and the environmental puzzles in Abzu. I mostly just remember that game for having lots of beautiful fish and spending lots of time swimming in circles and encouraging shoals of fish to swarm around me by pressing the button that seemed explicitly designed to do solely that for no particular purpose. But with these games and with Journey, I sort of respect them probably more than I enjoy them. Like, Journey is beautiful, and it's very clever in the way that it makes you feel as if you're working out what to do yourself, while always being it's being silently communicated to you what you're supposed to do in every situation. It's never actually hard, but it feels like you're working it out yourself. But at the same time, I find those games quite lonely to play, and I do often, when dropped into an environment like that, feel anxious, because I don't know what the puzzle is. I don't know where the edges of the puzzle are. Like, if you give me an Alan Hazelden style puzzle or a Sokoban or something like that, where I can see all the elements and I know what I need to do, I just can't work out how to do it, then I'm fine. I'm happy. I'll spend hours, if it takes hours, to solve that puzzle. Whereas drop me an environment where I can't see yet what the puzzle is, and I start to very quickly have that kind of feeling of being lost and slightly panicked and wanting to get out. And so in some ways, like, the Pathless feels like a much less impressive achievement of design, but at the same time, I wonder if I'm actually enjoying it more than the alternative, because it is just, blocks and pressure plates. It's always explicit. It's always very video gamey about what it is you need to do, and the flow state you get in with the movement mechanics of zipping around this open terrain is matched with a kind of flow state of solving these puzzles as well.
Do you think it's the comfort of the sort of familiarity of those puzzles kind of resonates more because of the time we're in. I wonder if that's like a factor where like we don't demand as much from our entertainment as we normally would, and actually having these systems that we are very familiar with are actually more not therapeutic but like more comfortable to actually engage with.
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it. Although I think I probably feel like this all the time, even when not in a pandemic or a hell year. I think probably I always want my entertainment to be close to lowest common denominator. I quite want to be pandered to, if I'm honest.
Yeah, me too.
It's so yeah. I don't want to be too down on it because it's not bad. I have lots of negative things to say about it, but I want to firmly position it as like a 6 or a 7 out of 10.
Oh,
Tasty.
A 6.5, as they say.
Now you're talking Tom's language.
That's right. I'm right in there.
I hear you guys have been playing a game that has some similarities to this.
Yes, we've been playing. As a strange yes. Yes, we have been playing a sort of similar game. We've both been playing Assassin's Creed Valhalla, lots of it, like we did last week, but more so. Yeah, like I said, I thought actually that I might have given up on it by this point, but I wanted to play up until the point where I managed to get to Orpington, which is the town that I'm from in Kent, which has a Roman. I don't know if it's in the game, but it has a Roman villa. So, and it was in the Doomsday Book, so there's a good chance that it is in the game. But that goal just seems to keep on receding over the horizon, and somehow now I've taken a wrong turning off the M25 and ended up in Asgard.
You made it.
But I do notice that they put Croydon in. And if they haven't put Orpington in, but they have put Croydon in, I'll be fucking livid.
I don't know fully what part of fake England this game's set in. Is Brighton in it?
I don't really know. It's I'm not quite sure how far.
I don't think it goes that far west.
Yeah. I think Brighton should be in it. Maybe.
Obviously, it should.
It'll be on the very edge of the map if it is, though. I think in the most furthest west corner, probably. But I haven't got down to the coast yet, so I can't say.
Given how many people in Brighton today have haircuts that make them look like Vikings, I think it's only fair that should be representing us.
Yeah,
quite right.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying it. But it is a sort of very diffuse sort of enjoyment. Because if you sort of look at any of the parts of it, I think they don't hold up to scrutiny very well. For example, I spend most of my time swearing at Ivor, the character you play, and the traversal in the game is sort of often non-functional. Like, I mean, obviously, it's a technological marvel that they've been able to execute across the course of the Assassin's Creed series, all this parkour and free running and stuff. But with a good frequency, I would say you leap off the bottom step of a set of stairs and Ivor just flings herself across a room to hold onto a pillar. And you're like, fucking hell, Ivor. Fucking hell. And, combat is a bit of a mess. Stealth is super overpowered by default. The AI doesn't seem to know really what to do if you kill them without being seen. They just sort of wander up and down stairs and climb ladders pointlessly, then start climbing down the ladders immediately. Difficulties all over the place. The boss battles are absolutely terrible. The facial animation can't really sell a lot of the drama. And yet I find I am really enjoying myself. It's just it feels like it's obviously it's more than the sum of its parts, but it might be the most more than the sum of its parts game. I mean, how do you feel about that, Tom? Am I overblowing its bugbears or
no? I agree with everything you say. It's all completely correct. And in fact, like based on some of the boss fights I faced, I put the whole game down to easy. Just because there are some just absurd difficulty spikes that are just absolute nonsense that just should be corrected. And I prefer to just simply carve everyone up with no effort, with spectacular animations. I think the thing that really keeps me going is that even though like Eivor is an empty character, whether like, he or she is just nothing. I think the female version has much better voice, but I still think like she doesn't stand for anything. It's just like simply an avatar for you, the gamer, which is a bit sad because like in previous Assassin's Creeds, your character was supposed to stand for something, and the thing about being an RPG or a role playing game is that you need to occupy a role, and you don't want to occupy an empty role for someone who just wants to kill and maim and pillage.
Yeah.
Which is functionally like what your clan exists to do in this game. So yeah, I found that a bit of a struggle. I find it much more interesting when you get out of the shadow of your brother, and you're actually like you're in England and you're actually going on like side quests to actually bring people on board and actually kind of like make oaths with different segments of England. And I find that that's a very good system. I really like the kind of the pattern of that in terms of how satisfying it is.
Yeah.
Like you'll do 2 hours of work, not work, but play. Then you'll get a good reward, and then you'll move on to the next 2 hours, and it gives you the illusion of choice. You don't really have a choice. That's the great thing about the system is that if you go for like the high level area like early, you're going to get murdered, and it's going to be an absolute nightmare. But it sort of guides you from like the north right into East Anglia and then down south, and I think that's quite elegantly done. Actually, I think that's actually like it's a way of structuring your experience without actually just giving you sort of objective markers, giving you the illusion of choice, and letting you sort of like feel as though you're expressing your will, even though you're not. No, is that your experience, Marsh, with this?
Yeah, that's the structure of it's really worked for me. I think you've nailed it. That it gives you. I mean, obviously, it is. You are free to go anywhere on the map, but I mean, you'd be pretty unwise to do it out of a pretty evident order. But all those main quests are much more satisfying to me than any of the main quest lines in previous Assassin's Creeds. Like I've typically with Assassin's Creed games is you sort of begrudgingly engage with the main quest line, and then just you're using it essentially to unlock access to areas so you can piss about. Whereas with this, I felt actually there's a very strong pull to do the individual quests, because they're also very varied. I mean, although your ultimate goal is to further the aims of your settlement, that involves a pretty explicit compartmentalization of that project into doing quests to benefit people in the different counties of England, and those are all so sufficiently varied that it feels, I don't know, it feels a lot more exciting to do. It doesn't feel like you're on this long treadmill slog towards some nebulous narrative goal. It feels like you actually have a real project to engage with, and that is really satisfying.
I agree with that, and I think the reason for that is that even though Eivor as a character is a total kind of avatar for you as an empty kind of player, the people you meet in each of those different like sections are actually really interesting, and they actually pose you interesting challenges. So one of them is like almost like a betrayal mystery. Who has betrayed this person? And you have to go and do missions with each of their inner circle and find out whether or not they are trustworthy or not. And I made the absolute wrong decision in that quest.
I'm really interested in this because I was pretty sure I'd nailed all the facts, and then I just had this nagging doubt afterwards that
That's exactly what I had.
Remembering, well, I don't know if this is a spoiler. It requires you to remember having seen somebody somewhere, and I may have just completely misidentified that person. But they're dead now, so it doesn't really matter.
That's a brilliant quest, though. That's a really good quest line. Each of those missions are fun when you're also investigating them, and you get to have like a personal chat with each of the inner circle. And I went with my brain rather than my heart with the final decision, and my heart was right. My brain was wrong.
No. So it tells you if you got it wrong, then?
There are consequences. Yeah.
I see. Okay.
It's very good. It's a very, very good mission sequence, and I think that's like one of the things that separates it from previous Assassin's Creeds is that like their proper like mainline missions are actually very well designed,
Yeah.
really like engaging, and have loads of good characters. And I feel as though the character comes from the NPCs in this game rather than the avatar, as opposed to
Yeah.
in previous Assassin's Creed.
I am warming to Ivor more now. Not so much because she has come to stand for anything, obviously, but because she has chilled out a lot more. When at the beginning of the game, when it's still set in Norway, so she's very much about getting revenge and glory and these things that I find it quite difficult to empathize with. But I think the idea behind it is that she is quite traumatized by certain events of her childhood, and these have come to overshadow her and define her. But the problem is the game can't really sell a lot of that kind of dramatic subtlety with the quality of the cutscenes that it has and the time that it is able to spend setting that up. And so it feels quite shallow. But I think there probably was more of an effort to make her into a bit more of a personality through that revenge drama. But it just seems to have, now she's reached England, that has dissipated. But I think that's actually for the best, because she's just a lot more personable to be around, basically. And I haven't played as the male Ivor, but the female Ivor has really good voice acting. And I think actually the writing throughout this Assassin's Creed is the strongest the series has ever had. Even though she herself is not especially kind of explicitly characterized, a lot of the kind of dialogue she has, it feels like it's been edited, which is not something that happens with a lot of games. And even the tone of it is pretty serious throughout. Again, not particularly like previous Assassin's Creed games, but I feel like actually for the most part that's very successful. And the execution of the dialogue and the fact that it is sort of paying quite a literate level of homage to Norse shenanigans, I think it's reasonably successful in that regard.
I find that there's a really interesting friction between the Norse ideals and Christianity.
Yeah, it does seem like it's engaging with some actually pretty kind of heady stuff, which is unusual. I mean, not in a kind of heavy-handed way, but in a by-the-by way. Just in the odd line, Ava will reel out some pretty beefy verse, and the other characters will go, "Whoa, check out this poet," and you're like, "Yeah, damn right, she's a fucking cool Norse poet."
Yeah, but also the idea of like when you're assassinating people of like Christian hell versus Helheim or Ragnarok or Valhalla, I think that's like an ongoing thing in the game that has been reasonably well observed, surprisingly.
The way that the Norsemen view Christianity actually comes up. There's a debate between it.
Sure.
Some characters are like, this is ridiculous of them. Kneeling before essentially a torture device which killed their god, the crucifix.
Well, quite.
And then other people are like, well, I'm sure our traditions just look as funny to them. And it's a little bit facile, but good on them for even engaging with that. That's
at least it's in there, right?
Yeah.
At least it's in there. Like they've actually like thought about it, and obviously there are like people probably in the studio that would probably have wanted to put more of that stuff in, but they are making a mainstream AAA game. But it's still cool. It's cool to see.
I also think I was way too quick to judge its depiction of England. I don't know if I was too quick. The part you arrive in doesn't feel at all like England, and
it does change though.
Yeah, I mean the more you roam, the more kind of individual familiar landscapes pop up. They are still very compressed, but they do manage to evoke rural England in some regards. Probably not as it would have been at the time, but at least it feels Englandish, and that's pretty good. And I particularly like the Roman ruins. It seems like they've really thought a lot about what essentially like a post-apocalyptic Roman settlement would look like.
Yeah,
these are Roman ruins as we know them. They are half-collapsed Roman ruins, and that is interesting to see. And also the relationship that local people have to those is also interesting, because they They don't necessarily know, apart from one character who's basically a fourth wall breaking comedy character who turns up in your settlement, who's there to create a Roman museum, basically. Outside of that, most people don't really know who the Romans were, and they refer to them as this ancient race of warriors. I mean, it would have been, distant past, 400 years ago, at a time when writing wasn't very common. I mean, who would have?
Yeah.
It's not like people would have really remembered necessarily who the Romans were at that stage. It's an interesting take on it. It feels very, very evocative.
That's definitely some energy, and also the fact that we've all lived in Bath,
Yeah.
in particular, I think perhaps highlights that particular theme. Graham, have you played it?
I have not. Should I?
Well-
I haven't listened to last week's podcast, so I don't know how it was covered there. But I've never really got on with Assassin's Creed games, but I do like open world action adventure-y romps. If I played Assassin's Creed for 6 hours, would I still be stuck in tutorial land, having no fun, or would I be having a grand old time?
Probably 2 to 3 hours to get out of tutorial land, which is Norway, which isn't very tutorially, I have to say.
No, it's very nice as well. It looks great. Also, if you just want to stick on easy, just blast through the opening hours and get to England, I think that's a very good way to play the game.
Is it actually good, or is it just a pleasant way to pass the time?
The latter.
Okay.
The second thing you said.
I mean, I saw a video on Twitter yesterday where there's a tribute to the Prodigy frontman Keith Flint in his home county of Essex. You can find a man called Keith who talks to you about his love of music and then plays a song in which he sings "Smack My Bishop, Smack My Bishop."
Very good.
See, that makes me want to play the game.
Oh, really? You see,
Yeah,
that's the
that's
kind of
good.
thing that wants me to uninstall it right away.
Essentially, the combat system isn't good enough to sustain hard mode. It's a good hack and slash thing, and I've played lots of difficult games. But the thing about playing a difficult game and it being satisfying is that the combat system has to be actually on point. It has to be sharp, and it actually has to be fair. And it's just they still haven't reached that in Assassin's Creed. They just haven't. It feels better to me than the last two games, but at the same time, there's no kind of challenge to it that's worth conquering. So just going down to easy and just chopping everyone up is the best way to play the game, I think. Still,
Yeah.
It's tempting. I need to sign up to Ubisoft Connect or whatever it's called so I can get it.
I do really like that there's no pointless sort of loot stat juggling in this game. That was my main bugbear with the last game, is you picking up swords and hammers and whatever else continuously, and I felt obligation to min-max that as much as my patience would allow. So I spent a lot of time in those menus just looking at tiny stat differences and trying to work out which was better, and then recycling items individually, which took a huge amount of time. And in this, basically, I think I don't know how many hours I've played it, lots now, and I've just picked up a second bow, which in itself doesn't make any fucking sense, because actually the way the skill tree works means that you have to put points into particular kinds of bows that you don't have for maybe, I don't know, 20, 30 hours before you actually get one of those bows, which suggests to me that but they haven't quite squared the circle. That a lot of the time, some of these systems are not necessarily, the thought's been put into them, but it hasn't necessarily been connected up with all the other things that are going on in the game.
Yeah, I feel like they're on the right track, though. Especially, I completely agree that the previous two games were always too RPG heavy in terms of the amount of stats and sort of things that you had to consider, particularly as you say, much about armor and stuff, and having less of that. But then if you go to one of the glowing kind of gold points on the map and you suddenly find a helmet or you find a new jersey or something, it's whoa, that's awesome. And actually that's what RPGs are supposed to give you. I think that RPGs, you're supposed to discover things in the environment that actually make your character more exciting and make the game more exciting. Whereas like I always feel as though like a lot of people who approach RPGs think about them as like Diablo.
Yeah.
That's a very, very different type of RPG. Like it's a different game. It's a totally different genre, to be honest.
There's something amazing about yeah, like you say. I mean, it's so rare that you pick up something that completely changes your weapon and your playstyle that it's really rewarding. But it's interesting offset against a lot of the other the kind of big rewards that you pick up, because you might do a fairly involved mission which involves like raiding a monastery, and then you bash down a door and you get your mate over to kind of heave off the lid of this huge golden chest, and then it says raw materials obtained. And you're like, yay, raw materials.
Yeah.
Or
it's
carbon
also like
ingot. You're like, fucking great. Put that on my mantelpiece.
Yeah. There's also every single animal you kill, no matter what it is, drops leather. Whether it's like a bird or a seal. And actually, like, I think that's a good thing. I think the language is bad for it. Like the writing is bad for it. But I like the idea that animals just drop one animal resource rather than having the kind of bothersome multiple different types of animals that you have in like Far Cry games, for example. So I think like everything you kill in nature drops nature fuel, or whatever the hell you want to call it. It doesn't have to be. It shouldn't be leather, because that's just wrong. But
meat credits.
Meat credits. That's what it should be. And then you spend meat credits on whatever the hell, I think that's like they've done a good job of streamlining the system, but there's almost like a kind of a language problem with the way they've expressed it to the player.
It sounds like it's a 7 out of 10, but a really good 7 out of 10. Like if 7 out of 10 is a genre, this is high up there.
Yeah, that's probably on the money.
So Marsh, I wondered, like, given all of our grievances with this, like, what actually keeps you playing it? What is the kind of
Orpington, man? Yeah, the glory of Orpington.
No, there must be more than that. Like
shining spires. Yeah, what is it? Why am I playing it? I don't really know. Do you know?
What I've learned is that if you equip an axe in the left hand and then hold the left bumper, you hit someone about 20 times a second with that axe. And that's what keeps me playing. Should we do some questions?
You know what? I think that's just the ticket.
I think so too.
Just the thing.
It's agreed.
It's agreed.
Jim has written in to say, hi, box smashers and ammo containers. First, thanks for the podcast. I've been a big fan since before this was the Crit and Crowbar. Secondly, I've recently realised that I do not play the same games to relax as many, likely more sane people. Whilst others seem to relax by playing, relaxed games, I tend to do the opposite when stressed. Rather than switching out my Destiny addiction for a more chill game, I often find myself booting up Doom, Super Hexagon, or similarly fast-paced titles. I think I do this because once I stop, rotating hexagons have been my primary source of stress for so long that I forget what I was otherwise worried about. Do any of you have any weird gaming habits when stressed beyond the usual chill soundtracks and numbers that go up formula? Thanks more weeding, Jim.
I really like this question because it highlights the fact that people relax in different ways, and things that are like conventionally considered to be stressful can be actually distracting and occupying for some people. I'm very much one of those people, which is why I've been playing Killer 7 as my chill out game recently on PC. It's got a PC port. It's a game about invisible suicide bomber demons that come at you relentlessly. And as they do so, they shriek and cackle, and it's basically a horror game. But I find it tremendously relaxing. It's just really nice to just hit those weak points and send them off to bed. And I just do. I find it kind of endlessly fascinating what people find relaxing or don't find relaxing. I think there's this sense that you're supposed to play Journey or play Flower or play something that's like encourages you encourages you to do deep breathing and kind of like really kind of relax into the world. Whereas actually, sometimes the best thing for me is just to shoot some stuff in a very good video game that's ostensibly stressful, but actually like ultimately quite cathartic, and I feel much calmer afterwards.
It's like I said before, I find Journey quite stressful or at least the first time I played it, because I didn't know what was expected of me. When really what I find most relaxing is having a job, because I know exactly what's expected of me. So the games I play most to relax are, say, Football Manager, where I'm going to spend my time thinking about transfers and plotting the next transfer window that's coming up, or City Skylines, where I'm trying to solve a road network in order to make traffic problems disappear so these little people can get to work in time in the morning. Games with busy work where there is always another plate that needs spinning, but there are very little actual consequences. That's what I'm playing to relax.
Anna writes in to say, Dear Creighton Crowbar Crew, in episode 348, one of you mentioned that he couldn't go to sleep unless he had seen a disemboweled horse screaming beforehand. This made me wonder, what are some of the most disturbing moments in video games you've experienced? What do you think makes these moments disturbing? Thanks for answering, Anna.
For me, it's the bath scene in What Remains of Edith Finch.
Yeah.
I don't know how much to describe it for fear of spoilers, but when I played that game, I think my kid was maybe 18 months old, and I give him baths a lot. You can kind of guess what the bath scene is in What Remains of Edith Finch now. And so it's a thing you're thinking about anyway, of like, don't ever take your eyes off your child for a second while they're in the bath.
Right.
Because they can't set themselves up if they fall over, basically. And so I played What Remains of Edith Finch, and it's a game with a lot of death in it, but it's kind of Tim Burton-y deaths. They're slightly tragicomic, and so I didn't find any of them affecting, except for that one, which just fucking destroyed me. I was just sobbing at my computer pretty much instantly.
Aww.
And then, this was in a little shared office with my partner, and when I turned around, she was watching over my shoulder, and she was sobbing as well, basically.
Oh, gosh.
I don't think she could even hear it. She was just, because I had my headphones on. But yeah, Christ. I mean, it's a really cheap bit of manipulation, especially when you're targeting, well, not explicitly targeting, but especially for new parents, like children in peril, it's going to get you every time, I think.
So much media pulls that lever. And like, I don't have kids myself, but like, I can absolutely see transparently when a film is like, oh, let's put a child in danger to create emotion. It's like, it's the cheapest, easiest thing you can do. And also, like, I'm not sure that Edith Finch, I'm not sure Edith Finch backs it up enough with enough like reason to do that. I don't know what you think, Graham, like about like how justified that was.
No, I don't think so, is the thing. Like, all the other deaths are comical in some way.
Yeah,
and like,
exactly.
It's someone taking a photograph and kind of tripping and falling off a cliff in a slightly funny way. And some of them are, there's some genuine feeling behind it. It's not all yuck, yuck, yuck or anything like that. And like the bath scene, it's presented from a first person perspective. You are the child in the bath, and I think you pull the plug out yourself, and it's a kind of musical sequence. So the toys in the bath swirling around and the water pouring in is all timed to this piece of classical music. But it's not. It's not funny enough, essentially, and it's just a horrible real thing that actually happens.
Right. Yeah. Sure.
As opposed to like a hermit getting obsessed with trains, or a strange like guy working in a fish factory who gets whisked away into his own dream world, sort of thing. Everything else is much more fantastical than this, which is I feel grounded in a much darker reality. And I love that game. I think it's a brilliant game. I wish it didn't have that particular scene in it. Like, that scene alone guarantees I will never replay that game, basically.
Yeah.
And likewise, if I'm watching a film or a television show and there is serious child in peril as a plot point, I'll just stop watching that. I'll just turn it off. I don't need that in my life. I'm fine.
Of course, yeah, of course. Even as as I said, like, I don't have a kid, but like I see it all the time in films and television, and not so much in games. Actually, they don't tend to go into that territory, but they like it's the easiest lever to pull is to put a kid in danger, and then any parents who are watching will be automatically like set off those instincts and that horror and that paranoia, and it's just such a cheap way to get an emotional reaction, I think. Especially when like kids are so poorly represented in games in other contexts. Like, how many like sort of child characters have you met in games that are actually like realistic ever?
Next to none, if you're talking about realism, I think.
So I met a couple of very good friends. I met their 2-year-old. She's not even 2 actually, but like her inquisitiveness and like her sort of like grasping at language and everything that was wonderful about like interacting with her and saying hello and meeting her. I've never experienced that in games or even films. It feels like just they're very, very bad at like games have never even attempted to capture what children actually like. But yeah, again, like Graham, you actually have children, so you're much better placed than me to actually judge this.
No, I mean, yeah, I completely agree with you. There's certainly nothing from that kind of age range. And when I think about older, like, 6, 7, 8-year-olds, you get into like Princess Maker 2. The
Yeah.
creepy father who, sends your kid off to do battle in the forest or trains them to become a housewife. That's the sort of experience I tend to think of. There's not that many. I mean, what, like the settlement in Fallout 3, is it Little Lamplight or something like that, which is entirely populated by children. But
that's true, but they're not really children, are they?
No, they're not really children. I mean, I don't know if this is a problem that I necessarily want video games to solve, though.
No,
because,
sure.
Because I have it in my real life, and it's not a source of escapism.
That's what Call of Duty needs, is more babies.
Oh God, don't put babies in Call of Duty.
As playable characters, gun-toting babies, obviously.
Rocket launchers on each shoulder. Yeah. Go to Iraq. Get them.
Metal Gear Solid 5 has child soldiers in it. You can rescue with the little helmets.
But that's fucking stupid, isn't it? Like, it's so bad. That bit is so bad.
Are these? But this is disturbing because it's. You think it's been artistically unsuccessful. Have there been moments in games which have been you've been disturbed by them and you've gone, yes, that was well done, bravo.
I think not. To be honest, the answer is no. But I would say some of the monster design in Silent Hill 2 was a very earnest attempt to gesture at like actual psychological horror that tapped into themes more than, let's say, most monsters just want to eat you, right? Like, they just want to like bite you and kill you, and that's the end. Whereas there's actually like a weirdly sexual element to a lot of the Silent Hill enemies, and like a child abuse element, to be honest, that was incorporated into the design of those creatures that actually made it much more affecting than any other horror game that I've played ever since.
Natural Selection 2 has a monster that can swallow you whole, and then you punch your way out of its anus through a puckered wall from the inside.
That's a catharsis of sorts.
It's pretty gross in a kind of really distinct way. But no, I don't want to be disturbed, and so I think pretty much any instance in which I am feels bad, man. Like, I don't ever think, "Oh, well done for disturbing me." I'm not sure it would be. I'm not sure it's difficult to disturb me is the thing. So I think it
Hmm.
usually feels cheap or trashy or just unwanted in some way to
Uh,
me.
the stuff that I feel actually disturbs me isn't just like straightforward violence or straightforward gore or a thing with big teeth. It's just like offbeat social interactions that are just a bit wrong. That films do extremely well, and when they want to, like a David Lynch or something like that, like a Bong Joon Ho film. What was his latest one?
Parasite.
Parasite. Yeah, exactly. Where there's just like slightly offbeat interactions and manipulation. I find that disturbing. Whereas gore just feels like tawdry to me, and that's what games trade in. Like games trade in gore and teeth and things being ripped apart and jibs and that kind of stuff. Um, and I'm not sure that games should take on that role. Like no one's asking games to be that kind of media, and though the kind of interactive element, it's just that there's some potential there. But again, like as you were saying, Graham, like do we want games to do this? Like,
Yeah, I don't know. I think of all the moments that are disturbing in games, they are moments where I feel that the game has failed in some way. In it, like it's disturbed me across the fourth wall. Maybe what disturbs me is the developers' lack of appreciation for how disturbing this thing should be. Like
right,
in one of the Saints Row games, I think I've told this story in the podcast before, where there's just a side quest where uh, you get a container full of trafficked women, and you basically sell them to somebody else, and it's all treated as a big joke, and an excuse to have scantily clad female models in the game, and uh, the just the just, that was one of the most depressing moments of my games journalism career. And I had to go for a long walk and think about my life choices after playing that.
no, quite reasonable. Yeah, no, that's really true.
God, it's
So that was, I mean, legitimately disturbing, but the game had no idea that it was disturbing,
Right, right.
and that was what was disturbing about it.
But I think Call of Duty as well. I think like I know we rag on Call of Duty a lot, but it's only because it deserves it. Just the sort of ahistorical, the kind of sort of reframing of history. I find that disturbing. Just as kind of like like trying to put heroes and villains into a conflict that was horrible on all sides. That is a kind of I find that disturbing in an Orwellian way.
Yeah, I
in the
mean, that
sense that,
complete
like,
lack of understanding history has real world consequences.
for sure.
And
Yep, absolutely, absolutely right.
I feel like it's extra disturbing when a lot of Call of Duty games use real world footage in their openings. Like they'll often have some sort of intro cinematic that will include real footage from the Vietnam War, say, including footage of captured soldiers being executed, shot in the head at point blank range. Now, this is like famous war reportage, and so it's like footage that you might have seen before in a documentary context, but they
Yeah,
are placing that that disturbing true footage of actual people actually dying alongside the ahistorical fucking Bond like action adventure movie that the rest of the thing is.
yeah,
What the
that's
fuck?
sickening. That's sickening. I remember, like, I think that's actually, I think it was Sega Relic did this with Company of Heroes 2, where they actually, the first trailers were just pure like war footage and with a voiceover. I was like, don't do that. Just don't do that. uh, it's already difficult enough that we're making entertainment out of that war, but to actually incorporate the real life footage of that stuff is just too much. It's too much. But yeah, no, you're right, Graham.
It's easy to rag on Call of Duty for this stuff, but it's a real problem with a lot of strategy games as well.
For sure.
Particularly like games like Hearts of Iron, for example, which let you carry out sort of alternate history takes on World War II anyway. and allow you to play as any side without any real moral framework.
Right.
Like you can play as the Germans, and they will have stats differences from the other sides, but it doesn't necessarily contextualize anything beyond that. And there are obviously a lot of people on the internet and in the world who will deny certain parts of
Hmm.
World War II ever took place, and
Yep.
who will divorce the realities of war from, oh, they just really like tanks and they fetishize the uniforms, and oh yeah, the Germans were bad, but they were really good at military maneuvers, and they were, like they were good at this, that, and the other thing. And these games give them a platform for exploring that stuff, simulating that stuff, reenacting it, divorced from that reality or any moral judgment. And so you get a real problem with forms of white supremacy and historical revisionism on strategy game forums.
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Graham, that's a really good point. I've encountered this massively. Like, I enjoy war games. I paint little miniatures. I do little kind of wars with them, but not normally in like high fantasy contexts. There's actually there are really good rule sets based around World War II era armory and infantry, and I'm very tempted to play it, except I don't want to lovingly paint a Nazi half track.
Right.
I never like, yeah, that's not the hobby I want. Um, you could have a simulation, you could have a sort of like, and to be honest, there is a kind of fascination with the conflict in that era because the machinery and the technology was so evenly matched that it made for extremely interesting encounters. But we shouldn't be looking at those encounters as interesting because so many people were murdered in those encounters. And the idea that you can sort of read rule sets and roll some dice to resolve this and be like, oh, that's an interesting standoff, and then somehow divorce that from the reality of what you're trying to represent. For me, that's impossible. I can't do that. But I think a lot of wargaming communities do, and they're just happy to sort of like extrapolate from the equipment that each force had, and then roll it off as a duel without any of the context that the necessary context that should be part of what you're replicating. Turning that into a game, I think like I have a moral problem with it. I'll be honest, like I can't get past it.
how do you feel about Crusader Kings?
So I've not played most Crusader Kings, but I think what you're gesturing at here is like, if is there enough distance between the conflict that you can kind of get past the qualms? Is that what you kind of is that what you're
Yeah,
going?
it's kind of come up a bunch in the Crusader Kings community, because when that series launched, I don't know how long ago, the first game would have been 15 years ago now, maybe longer. Um, it felt like the relationship with that period of history was more innocent, or at least the the alt right and the racists weren't yet so prominent on the internet and
Right.
within culture. Because, for example, they released an expansion for Crusader Kings 1, I think, called Deus Vult. And Deus Vult is it's a Latin Catholic rallying cry associated with the Crusades, but it's come back to prominence because it's being used by the alt right, um, as like representative of a culture war between Christianity and Islam, or between the West and the Middle East, and that sort of stuff. Like it's a racist dog whistle. It's
Yeah.
more just a racist whistle, to be honest. It's not really
Yeah.
much of a dog whistle.
Right.
And so then it becomes this problem of like, well, how it's also a historical term, like I say, there was an expansion that used that name for the first game. How do you represent it in Crusader Kings 3, where the context in which the game is being released is very different? It's tricky. Like, and like a lot of people were playing Crusader Kings 3 when it came out a few months ago, and they're not actually going on a crusade in that game. Like, the Crusades are only a small part of what Crusader Kings is about, particularly now in the third iteration. You sort of wish they would just kind of rename it Medieval Jape Simulator. Like, it's just it's just silly dynasties and trying to kill your children now. To
Yeah,
bring it
so
back to that.
if I recall correctly, the Pope occasionally asks you to, come on a crusade, but you could just ignore him and then just carry on with your business, right? Like, that's kind of how the game works,
pretty much.
more or less.
Yeah, and you can also was it Tom who was playing who said that Tom F, sorry, who led a crusade against Wales?
Yes.
So it's like it's ahistorical to a huge degree, in a way that, in some ways, I think it's good. It's better. Like, I don't want a game about the actual Crusades, not right
Sure,
now.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But yeah, it's a lot of blurry lines with this stuff, I think, in terms of how it's represented.
Yeah, this is definitely sort of a problem that's been running throughout all of like wargaming in video games as well as like tabletop games for decades, where like there are people who want to actually relitigate particular scraps on the the borders of France and German occupied territory in World War II with exactly the correct equipment, exactly the correct attire, and that's a kind of like, I don't know, that's very, very depressing to me. In a way that it just feels as though you can read about it and understand the consequences of it without having to sort of celebrate it in that way. I feel like that is, I think there's a point where it is a celebration. Like, if you're actually making a game about a thing, putting loads of hours into recreating livery and uniforms and tanks, I think that's a form of celebration. I think if you're producing models that people are painting, I think that's a form of celebration. I think all of that stuff just elevates evil machines and evil methods of war that we should leave behind. Don't at me. Don't at me.
That might be the podcast title this week.
Oh, I'm gonna get so many complaints, but that's what I think. What are you gonna do?
I agree. I'll throw my lot in with you. Don't at me.
Don't at Graham. At me. Don't at Graham. Leave Graham alone. I'll take the brunt of this.
I think we've sort of answered that question. We may have answered
Nope.
several other questions.
We definitely. I don't think we answered that one, but yes, you're right.
Sorry, Anna. Anyway, Lord Monkfish writes in about Assassin's Creed Valhalla. He has a complaint with it that the handling of stealth isn't particularly good. At every point, I feel funneled towards combat, less opportunity or incentive to silently clear an outpost. While the last game had its war battlefields and bosses, you were otherwise free to play the assassin. In Valhalla, certain enemies cannot be assassinated. The prompt simply doesn't exist, and many missions involve fighting as a group. Does anyone on the pod have any thoughts about stealth in this especially cookie-cutter installment of Assassin's Creed? Who knew vipers plagued Britain in the Middle Ages?
That last point in particular is one of the most irritating things about Assassin's Creed. It's like, I know we've got adders here. Do we actually have nests of vipers?
Vipers are adders.
Oh,
they are, but it's just a different name for them. But they aren't very aggressive, and there are very, very few of them.
Yeah,
it's a pretty safe country as far as wildlife goes, which is another reason that it's a kind of unusual choice for an Ubisoft setting. I tell you what is weird about Valhalla, though. There are so many fucking herons. Occasionally you see a heron. In this game, like, there are flocks of herons. Just herons and herons for fucking miles. Herons from horizon to horizon.
They've got seagulls, right, though? They're everywhere as well. They're also, they fly very, very slowly, which is not my experience. Because I was in Cornwall and I had an ice cream, and one of them, like, swoop bombed me, grabbed the ice cream with its claws, flew off, fell into the water, and was never seen again.
Really?
And it was much faster than the seagulls I've seen in Assassin's Creed. So, yeah.
Wow.
Do your research, folks.
You were lucky. Had that been a heron, you would have lost an arm. So
That would be that would be the end of me.
I was going to say, you should be able to pet the herons in the way that you can pet your eagle in the Pathless.
Oh, let me pet a
Nice
heron.
tummy rub.
That's what it's all about. I want to stroke a heron's beak.
Yeah, but herons are rubbish, though. Like,
What?
Yeah,
Herons are great. They're like a
it's-
direct connection to their dinosaur kin. You see one taking
Yeah,
flight,
but-
and you're like, that's a fucking pterodactyl.
Yeah, but then you could see a bloke on the street and you might have a direct connection to the Queen of England. And you're like, you're still a fucking twat, aren't you?
I like herons. I think you're giving herons a bad rap.
That's maybe so.
But as for the stealth,
I find that the stealth works really badly in this game. And maybe it's because I'm bad at the game. But like when I've actually tried to take stealthy attempts at missions, after the first person I've assassinated, everyone is alerted, and I have no idea how to avoid that. So I feel like the game prioritizes all-out combat with axes.
yeah, it's very confusing. It doesn't really. I've completed some assassination missions just by sneaking in and killing the main dude, and sneaking out again. And sometimes I've completely cleared an entire outpost silently. But then at other times, it seems like it does railroad you into direct combat. And there's certain missions like the raids which require you to do it with your cohort, and so you can clear out an entire village basically of people by yourself, and then because you can't open a chest by yourself, you need to honk this big horn and have all your fellow raiders pour off a boat and get into a big barney with enemies who've suddenly respawned, and that kind of does suck a giant Viking dong.
It's rubbish.
But, yeah.
Especially because, like, once you've upgraded one part of your settlement, you have like a second, like a kind of Commander Riker that you get to customize. And like the great solution to this would be to press a button to summon him, and he just spawns over your shoulder, comes in, helps you to open the door, helps you to do the other stuff.
Like the
And
horse.
Also,
You can summon anybody.
like the horse.
The horse should help you with those chests. That's what should happen.
The horse should help you. And also, I love that in this game you can summon the boat like you summon a horse. So you can just honk a horn, and then the camera pans over to you as you're blowing the horn. Then it pans back out, and the boat is suddenly there. It's like, wow, this is the best transport ever.
I like the thought that they've been silently following you, carrying this boat around the whole time, like like a film
Very
crew
quietly.
behind Bear Grylls or something, when he's in those pseudo solo filming segments somewhere in the desert, and you just know there's like 5 other people there waiting to mop his brow as soon as the camera stops rolling.
Yeah, he's like, oh, I need to drink loads of water so that my stomach feels like it's full. And then the camera moves away, and someone just feeds him 3 sliders. He's like, blah, 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 blah.
I watch a lot of like vlogs on YouTube, like travel vlogs of people that do solo traveling, and they legitimately are on their own. They're not out in the wilderness; they're in populated places. But it just makes me conscious all the time of the fact that they're placing down a camera, walking off towards the distance, then cutting. But really, what happens at that point is they have to turn around, run back, get their camera, pick it up, carry it to another spot, place it down, walk in front of it as if going up this mountain. Cut, come back, try and get the camera. Like they're just constantly faking their own walking away and then having to double back on themselves. And that's all I think about when I watch travel vlogs on the internet now. Is just that is the fact that they're double backing on themselves constantly. So
I think about
that. I'm glad that Bear Grylls has a crew that carry his equipment for him.
I love that about all reality TV. So there's one at the start of this year, which I think it's called Love Is Blind, and like the way this works is you've got a bunch of blokes on one side of a flat, and then you've got a bunch of women on the other side of the flat, and then they each go into rooms that with each other, but there's a screen between the men and the women, and they have to try and make a connection. And at the end of the process, after 4 weeks, they have to decide who they want to marry. And
Wait, what?
Okay.
yep.
Skipped some stages there.
Wow.
Yep.
Still a
Stakes are high.
Countenance this kind of mayhem.
The stakes are high, and I'd recommend watching the first season of this because it will definitely come back because it was really successful. But everyone going into it in future will know how it's supposed to go, and they will kind of like play up and big up their Instagram personality as part of it, etc., etc. But it's fantastic to watch the first season because once they've actually decided who they want to pair up with, they go into a flats. They go to like a series of flats together, and the way the arguments are filmed are so fake. It's remarkable to see. So there's like there's a bit where there's a woman who's just like standing crossed arms in the kitchen, and the guy's in the bedroom just like about 10 meters away, and he's got his arms crossed, and then she insults his sexual ability, and then it cuts over to him, and he just sort of shakes his head. And what you're thinking at all of these times is like, there are cameras right here pointing at both of you, and you've put them in exactly the right place to capture this nonsense pretend piece of drama. And that is like, I love that meta drama. Almost as like how the producers kind of stimulate the drama or make the drama happen, and how the cameras kind of like capture it in such an artificial way. But yeah, anyway, that's nothing to do with video games.
Good video game chat.
Did we answer the question?
Oh yes, yeah. Ubisoft can learn a lot from this segment. I think those were all the questions that we have time for. If you'd like to send us a question, you can do so at questions@creatingcrowbar.com, or you can tweet us at creatingcrowbar. All these recordings are uploaded as videos to YouTube, where you can find other nonsense by us. The address for that is youtube.com/creatingcrowbar. Thanks as always to our Patreon backers. You can back us too at patreon.com/creatingcrowbar, or you can simply join our lovely Discord community, the link for which is on our website, creatingcrowbar.com. That's it. I've been Marsh Davis, and I'm off to pet a heron.
And I've been Graham Smith, and I'm off to pet an eagle.
My name's Tom Senior. I'm going to hunt throughout the night to pet a golden retriever somewhere in this city. My Twitter account is now Mr. Tom Senior. Yeah. It was the only one that wasn't taken. So yeah, if you want to catch up with my ridiculous Assassin's Creed thoughts, that's the place to do it.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks for listening, everybody.